Now, lighting is without a shadow of a doubt one of the most important factors in photography, and I think most of us can agree on that. But the reason for that is not just because of how lighting affects the look of our image, but perhaps more importantly, it's because of how it affects the way our image feels and the emotions and the story that that image is telling. But lighting is also one of those things that can be a little bit difficult to understand as a photographer. So today in this video, I want to do a deep dive into lighting in photography, talk about 3 lighting concepts that you need to understand as a photographer, and also give you guys some practical lighting techniques that you can start implementing right away. And also I'm giving away 6 of my favorite presets. There's a link down in the description, and I hope you guys enjoy. Now, when it comes to lighting in photography, I think there's 3 core concepts that you need to understand, and they're all related to the light source that we're shooting with. The light source being the source that we're getting our light from to capture that image in, whether it be the sun, whether it be this softbox that I'm using to film this video. And those concepts are the quality of the light source, the strength of the light source, and the direction of the light source. Now, the quality of the light source is exactly as it sounds. You have high quality light sources, and you have some pretty crappy light sources as well. And I think the best example to give here is natural light or light from the sun versus artificial light or any light that is not created from the sun. Now, generally speaking, natural light is the highest quality light that we have available to shoot in. The sun is massive and that light can get very soft. It has beautiful color to it. It's just a very high quality light source that's readily available. Now, artificial lights or man-made lights, on the other hand, can also be a fantastic tool for us as photographers, especially when the sun is not reliable. Artificial lights allow us to shape our own light and really take control of a scene, but they are much more difficult to make look natural. You can never mimic the sun. So that's something to always keep in mind with artificial lights. And also, a lot of the artificial light that we have available to us is just not very high quality. And you'll notice this if you go into a coffee shop, for example, and you see those light bulbs hanging and they have that really beautiful warm tint to them. And then when you go to take a picture, they start flickering. That's because those light sources are a low quality light source and they're not going to look good in a photograph. Now, of course, if you're shooting at night, you won't have any natural light to shoot with, and that's where you become fully reliant on artificial light. And that light could be light that you're in control of, like a flash, or it could be ambient light, which is just light that's available to you in your environment, and you really don't have any direct control over it. Now, I love shooting at night because you can get some really interesting and dynamic lighting scenarios, and all the principles that I'm discussing in this video translate directly to shooting at night as well. But for the rest of the video, I will mainly be discussing natural light, as it's hands down the highest quality light source that we have available to us, and I think it's more relevant for most photographers. But if you guys do want to see a video dedicated to night photography, let me know in the comments down below. Now, next up is the strength of the light source. And if you have a really strong light source, that's going to create very hard light, which is going to create a much more contrasty scene. Whereas on the flip side of that, if you have a weak light source, that's going to create some really nice, beautiful soft light that's a little bit easier for cameras to photograph. And you'll often hear this word called dynamic range being thrown around in photography. Dynamic range is essentially the range of light that your camera can capture from the dark end to the bright end. And usually cameras can capture anywhere between 13 and 15 stops of dynamic range. But the human eye can see between 21 and 24 stops of dynamic range. So your camera is not gonna have the same latitude as you, and that's why you'll often see people talking badly about harsh light or harsh midday light. That's because if the light is too strong, your camera is just not gonna be able to capture details in the highlights and in the shadows. You're gonna have to pick one, and that may or may not be a good thing for your photograph. But I think I'm getting ahead of myself here. So I think the most important thing you need to understand here is hard versus soft light and their effect on the contrast of our photo. Now, last but not least is the direction of the light source. And this is one of those things that's ignored by so many photographers, but it arguably has the biggest impact on your photograph. And what we're talking about here is your orientation to the light source and that light source's orientation to your subject. And by either moving the light source around or by you shifting your perspective in accordance to your subject, you can greatly change the way that photo looks. And generally speaking, there's 3 main directions of light that we can shoot in as photographers. The first one is front light. So the light is behind you and you're shooting with the light. So everything in your scene is going to be nice and evenly exposed, and that looks good, but you are going to be missing out on some pretty interesting shadows in that shot. And that's why I personally like to shoot with side light. So the light is to the side of you and your subject, and that creates some really beautiful shadows in your scene that add a ton of depth and a ton of visual interest as well. I'm almost always looking to shoot with side light because I think it makes the scene just look so much more interesting. And the last direction is backlight. So you're actually shooting into the light source or into the the sun and that subject is in the middle between you and that light source. And this is going to make the shadows in your shot look much deeper, much darker, and much more dramatic as well. But if the light source is too strong, you're going to get something called a silhouette photo, but that's essentially where your subject appears completely dark or completely black, and then you can see them kind of highlighted against the sky. Now, I also really enjoy shooting backlight as well. I think it adds so much interest to the scene, but generally speaking, I think shooting with the light source to the side of your subject just adds so much depth and so much interest. But when you are out shooting, I think it's super important to constantly shift your perspective, if you can, to change the direction of that light source in your shot. Like I said before, this is going to have massive implications on the way your photo looks and the way your photo feels. So always be experimenting with different perspectives. Now, I do want to bring up light modifiers here as well, and we can actually manipulate light sources to make them harder or softer, or to change the direction of them. So in the form of artificial light, that might be something like a softbox, and if you're shooting in natural light, that can be a 5-in-1 reflector set that you can use to either reflect light back onto your subject, or you can diffuse that light by pushing it through a white sheet, for example. The light is going to hit that white sheet, it's going to diffuse, and it's going to look much, much softer. Now, we can also use things like smoke, haze, or mist to either diffuse light or to create atmospheric light. And this is a really cool way to get light rays in your photos, like this one spot in Bali where the light spills through the palm trees and hits the incense burning in the morning, creating these gorgeous light rays. Smoke is one of the easiest ways to make a shot look 10 times more cinematic, as it adds a ton of density to the light in your shot. It's also important to think about how light reflects as well. If you have a white surface like a white wall, that light will reflect off of it and often produce a very soft, beautiful light. Whereas a dark wall will absorb that light and can be used to enhance shadows in one part of your image, which is why you'll often find photographers using black cards or black boards in a studio shoot to enhance shadows in a certain part of their image. Now, I know these concepts might seem a little bit basic, but they really are the foundation of lighting in photography, and there's something that I'm always thinking about. Even if I'm doing something like planning a trip, these are all things that I think about because I want to know what type of light that I'm going to get when I arrive at my destination. And speaking of planning my trips, I use an incredible tool called Milanote to plan out my trips from start to finish, and Milanote is graciously sponsoring today's video. Milanote is a tool for organizing all of your creative projects, and it's an interactive online canvas that makes it easy to plan, brainstorm, and collaborate on ideas. And it's perfect for creative people like us because we like to see things visually, and we can organize things in a way that makes sense to us. So let's jump on the computer and I'll show you guys how I used Milanote to plan out my trip to Japan in November of last year. So this is a project board that I created to plan out our Japan trip. We spent 3 weeks in Japan and it was such an epic trip, but as you can see, I have pretty much everything I need here at one glance. Up here in the left-hand corner, I have the trip overview with the dates, the locations, the purpose. I also have a general timeline, and also over here, I have my transport details. And one of the things I love so much about Milanote is I can go ahead and click on my flight details, and it's going to immediately open up my flight details there to view, so I can quickly access them at the airport if I need to. I also have a list of photography locations here that opens up into a Google map, as well as a bunch of checklists here, including gear to pack and things to do, and you can easily just check those off when you're done. But one of my favorite parts about Milanote is the fact that I can create these really engaging and inspiring mood boards directly in the app. So if I click here on my mood board for Japan, you can see I have a ton of images that I've come across during the planning phase of the trip. And to add these in, it was super easy. You can use the Milanote web clipper. You can just go online, find a photo that looks good, and just easily add that in. Or you can just drag and drop a photo into your board and it will show up there in the mood board. So it's very interactive, and you can put things pretty much anywhere you want on the canvas, which is one of my favorite parts about Milanote. And once you finish your boards and you're ready to share your work, you can invite your team to gather important feedback and collaborate with them in real time, which is super useful if you're working with others on a creative project. Plus, Milanote has over 100 built-in templates available for every type of creative project, including photography and videography. And because you guys mentioned that you wanted to download this specific template last time I mentioned Milanote here on the channel, it's now available as an official template, and you can find it in the Milanote app, which is super cool. Now, if you guys want to try out Milanote, it is completely free with no time limit at all, and you can check it out via the first link in the description. Milanote really has been an awesome tool for me, not just for planning my trips, but also keeping all of my creative projects organized in one place. Thank you so much, Milanote, for sponsoring this segment of the video. Now let's get back to it. Okay, so now that we have a good understanding of the core concepts of lighting in photography, let's start talking about some of the different types of natural light that we can find while we're out shooting. And the first one is, of course, sunrise and sunset, and this is also known as golden hour. And when you're learning photography, one of the first things you'll hear is that golden hour is hands down the best time to shoot. And the reason for this is because the light at golden hour is absolutely beautiful. You get this really soft, beautiful directional light that spills in through the side of your scene and creates tons of interesting shadows in depth, and it just looks really good. And also because that sun is so low in the sky, you're not going to have an overly contrast scene, so it's going to be a little bit easier for your camera to capture the entire range of light in that scene. But I think it's also important to note that sunrise and sunset are actually completely different times to shoot, and the reason for that is because the sun is in a completely different part of the sky depending on whether it's sunrise or sunset. So one scene might look amazing at sunrise because you have this beautiful backlight, but it might not look very good at sunset because it's front lit. And when I'm shooting something like landscape photography, I use an app called Photo Pills, which allows me to predict where the sun is going to be in the sky, so I know the angle of light in that shot. Now, the second type of light we can expect to shoot in is blue hour, and this is about an hour before sunrise and an hour after sunset. And blue hour is hands down my favorite time to take photos. The light is incredibly soft and it has this beautiful blue tint to it, and you can get some really dreamy and moody shots when you're shooting at blue hour. It is a little bit dark, so you might have to open up your aperture a little bit, and oftentimes when I'm shooting at blue hour, I'm shooting at f1.4, but you just get these beautiful shots with gorgeous color, and that's one of the reasons why it's one of my favorite times to take photos. Now, next up is midday light. Notice how I'm not saying harsh light. I don't think there's anything wrong with shooting in the middle of the day, and a lot of the time you'll hear that sunrise and sunset is the best time to shoot, but that's not true at all. A lot of scenes look really good in the middle of the day. It just depends on where you are, and also it depends on what time in the middle of the day it is. If you're shooting at 12 and the sun is directly ahead of you, yeah, in those scenes you might not have any shadows at all. But even if you just wait for like 2 hours, the light can get really nice. So just because you're shooting in the middle of the day doesn't mean the light is going to be super hard or super soft. And sometimes we want to shoot in that hard light anyways. I know when I'm shooting in cities, I really do enjoy shooting in that hard light. You take a city like New York, for example, where you have these really tall buildings. When you have that hard light spilling in through the city, you're going to get some really interesting geometric lines caused by that light. You're going to have some beautiful shadows, some really nice highlights as well, and those can act as really strong and powerful leading lines in our photo. So there's really nothing wrong with hard light. It's just a different style of photography. The one place where I do think hard light is really difficult to shoot in is in nature. When you're shooting foliage and you have all this hard light coming in and hitting the leaves and hitting the trees, you're going to get a ton of hot spots on that foliage, and it's just not going to look very good. But in a city, I love shooting during the middle of the day. I think it makes our compositions a lot more dynamic, a lot more interesting, and sometimes we do want that higher contrast look in our scenes. So there's nothing wrong with shooting in the middle of the day. I think it's just important to think about the type of light that you want for the scene that you're shooting. And last but not least is a cloudy or an overcast day. And a lot of photographers really love shooting on overcast days because when that sunlight hits those clouds, it gets nice and diffused and you have this really beautiful, soft, even light over everything. And this soft light is really easy to shoot in. Yes, it's not going to be as dramatic or as interesting as golden hour light, for example, but sometimes that might be exactly what you're looking for. If the light is too dramatic, it can distract from your scene in some situations. So some photographers really enjoy shooting in overcast weather because that light isn't distracting from the scene, and they can use that beautiful diffused light from the clouds to capture a really well exposed shot of their subject. It's also really great for portrait photography because you're going to get a nice and even exposure across your entire subject's face. So those are kind of the four main categories of natural light that we can encounter, but it's also important to remember that this is going to vary massively depending on where you are in the world and the time of year. The winter light is much different from summer light, for example. Summer in California has very warm and directional light, whereas winter in Japan is going to be really soft and diffused light. So there's so many different types of natural light available to us, and you're not really always going to know how it's going to look until you go and you just pay attention to it. But I think it's really important to remember that all light is beautiful. Sunrise and sunset is not necessarily better than shooting in the middle of the day. Sometimes we want that hard light, sometimes we want that soft light, and we should always be asking ourselves what type of light is going to enhance our shot and give us the look that we want. But now I want to move on and talk about some key lighting tips that I think will help you guys out in understanding light a little bit more. And the first one is to remember that you cannot change the light after you shoot it. You need to get it right in the camera. Yes, when you go in to edit a photo, you do have a little bit of creative control. You can kind of shape the light a little bit more using the range masks. You can play around with the contrast and you can play around with the exposure, but you can't actually change the light in that scene. And that's why I think it's so important to pay very close attention to the light while you're shooting. Really think deeply about the direction of the light. Look at all the things that are in your scene and look at how that light is kind of bouncing around and just see how you can play around with it a little bit. You're not gonna be able to significantly change that light in Lightroom, even though it is a super powerful software. And if you guys do want to learn how to use Lightroom, I have a super detailed Lightroom masterclass. I'll put a link down in the description. Now, tip number 2 is to shoot into the shadows. And this is all related to the direction of the light source that I talked about earlier. And the reason why I think this is such an important tip is because I think a lot of photographers will go into a scene and think about how they can capture as much detail and as much exposure as possible. And oftentimes that means shooting with the sun behind you or shooting with front light. So everything is nice and evenly exposed. But like I said before, shadows add so much interest to our scene. So if you're shooting with side light or you're shooting with backlight, you're gonna have a lot more interesting shadows in that scene, and it's gonna create so much depth and so much more interest in that photo. So I always recommend shooting into the shadows because I think it's one of the fastest ways that you can level up your photography. Now, tip number 3 is light can be a subject in and of itself. I know a lot of the time when we're talking about light, we're talking about how we could use that light to enhance our subject, but light can be the subject in and of itself. And if you're shooting in really dramatic light at sunset or at sunrise, you're gonna have some really beautiful light that can become the subject and become the star player in that photo. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with having the light as the subject. And a lot of the time when I'm out shooting and I notice beautiful light, I'll just photograph the light because I think it makes such an interesting subject. And even if it isn't the main subject, light can play a massive role in your composition. Like I said earlier, if you're shooting in harder light or stronger light, it's gonna cast some really deep dark shadows, and you can often get some really interesting leading lines using that light as well. So pay very close attention to it and use it as a compositional element, or even just photograph the light as the subject itself because light is gorgeous. Now, the next tip on this list is kind of related to all of these tips, and that's to work with the light and not against the light. Now, you might find yourself in some situations where the light is just not looking very good. It might be a little bit too harsh. It just might not be what you're looking for in that scene. And sometimes the light really just might suck, but other times there might be ways that you can creatively use that light and you could find something that works. Now, honestly, most of the time, this relates to the direction of that light source. And if you shift your perspective and you change the angle in which that light is coming in, you can rescue a shot with terrible light. You can find something really interesting. Or you might need a modifier to kind of shape that light a little bit. And that's why a 5-in-1 reflector set is so incredibly useful for us as photographers, is because we can kind of shape that light a little bit, play with it, and experiment with it to get something that's a little bit more pleasing. Especially if you're shooting something like portraits or products, I would always recommend carrying a 5-in-1 reflector set. Now, the last tip on this list is to just pay closer attention to the light that you see on a daily basis. Even if you're going out and you don't have a camera, just look at the light that's around you and you start to notice some really gorgeous and beautiful light when you're out and about. Every time you notice the light and you make little mental notes about it, that's going into your database that you can utilize for photography. And every time I hang out with photographers, we're constantly chatting about the light wherever we are. It could be in the middle of the day, we could be talking about how harsh the light is, or we might be talking about how beautiful and soft it is. Photographers are highly in touch with the lighting in their environments, even if they don't have a camera with them. So just pay more attention to the light that's around you. And if you are going out to shoot in all light as well. You need to know what it's like to shoot in harsh light. You need to know what it's like to shoot in soft light. And the more that you shoot and engage with a wide variety of lighting environments, the more you're gonna start to understand lighting at a deeper level. And after a while, you're gonna get so good at reading the light in a scene that you already know how it's gonna look before you even take a picture. I honestly think this last tip is the most important tip in this video, because lighting is one of those things that almost becomes instinctive for you as a photographer, and you really start to understand it at a deeper level when you start engaging with it a little bit more. And one of the things that you'll find in almost every talented photographer is that they have a very deep and intricate understanding of light, and that comes through time and practice and just paying more attention to the light that you see. But that is kind of the core foundation of lighting in photography. And obviously you can learn so much more about lighting in photography. It can get quite technical, but honestly, I like making these videos because I think this is all that you really need to know in order to go out and really excel at it. You don't need this super detailed, basic understanding to get good at light. Being good at light in photography is just having the ability to notice beautiful light and capture it in a beautiful way. And like I said before, this is kind of a very instinctual thing that comes through just trial and error, practicing, experimenting, shooting in terrible light and seeing how that looks in our images, and also shooting in beautiful light and really paying attention to how gorgeous that light looks in our images. Lighting certainly is an interesting topic, and I hope this video was helpful for you guys in some way. If you guys have any questions about lighting, let me know in the comments down below. I love talking about this, and I reply to every single one of my comments on my YouTube videos, and I love chatting with you guys. And also let me know in the comments down below if you guys actually enjoy these kind of longer tutorial style photography videos. I honestly enjoy making them, but I want to make sure that you guys enjoy them too. So let me know in the comments down below if you guys like these videos. But that is all for this video, guys. Thank you so much for making it to the end. And also thank you so much, Milano, once again for sponsoring this video. And I will catch you guys again very soon in the next one.